Tell me what your life was like before you died.
I was born and raised in the South. My dad was a hardened surgeon, military medic from World War II Pacific Theater. I gather that he was just kind of turned off by religion, so I grew up free of it. That anybody took the notion of an afterlife seriously until I was 18 years old in Plato, my first year at the University of Virginia, and immediately decided to major in philosophy. At the end of Plato's Republic, there's this story about a man who was believed dead and resuscitated, and Plato obviously took it seriously. The man told of this amazing experience. 3 years later, I met Dr. George Ritchie, who was a professor of psychiatry at University of Virginia, and I heard his story of the same thing, close call with death. Subsequently to that, through a PhD in philosophy and an MD and a residency in psychiatry and career as a forensic psychiatrist, I had the wonderful privilege, as it is, Alex, of interviewing literally thousands of people from all over the world who went to the brink of death and came back and had these amazing stories. I know in my life many, many wonderful people, including my best friend of life, Milton Friedman, not the economist, but presidential speechwriter, who didn't want there to be life. I mean, it's wish fulfillment. It's just, it doesn't matter whether people wish or don't wish this to be. It is or it isn't, regardless of it. I think that human life is a story, and even your consciousness is narrative directed. When some new event happens to you in life, what do? Your mind automatically weaves it into their life story. So what I think is this thing we're in is the hyper future version of what you guys do out there in Hollywood, in my opinion. I think this is the movies and the whole setup of life. You may say, well, that's a simple logical fallacy, because what you're doing is you're taking one aspect of the human life, namely the theater, and projecting it out as a model for a whole. And I understand that fallacy, which Aristotle identified. However, what I think is it happened the other way around. I think the reason we have the theater is that, just as I learned in my geriatric psychiatry career, I got to talk to some eminent, celebrity, knowledgeable, refined, reflective people who just would go back and say, you know, Raymond, the older I get, the more the impression develops, an uncanny impression develops. When I look back at my life, that it's been a story or a movie or a novel or a play, whatever term they used. You know, we all know the story, Pisistratus there in Athens and the chorus that had been going on for a long, long time. So what I'm getting at is, I think this thing that we're in is kind of like a theater. And the way I gather is just like, that's what people naturally come to as they grow older, that this has been a kind of script or a story. And then as I gather, you know, from my own way I put this together, I gather that we die, and then we go through some incomprehensible process, and then we're back on another story. As both of my kids have assured me, I don't, you know, I mean, in terms, I learned this from my two kids, because, you know, they never went to church. My wife and I don't talk about life after death. We talk about the phone bill, what's for dinner, the movie, you know, so, but they both just independently recalled where they were before they came to us. And we adopted both of them at birth. So I watched this unfold. And you know, it's like, I often ask people this for about 10 years. I've been observing this. I asked, let's suppose that you were diagnosed with a terrible infection that required that you be isolated all by yourself on a desert island for 10 years. And they would send you over there in a cargo plane with plenty of room for all the food and water and medicine that you're going to need for 10 years. But in addition, there's some extra room so they can send a DVD player and, let's say, 10,000 DVDs. Ask people under that circumstance is, would you choose all comedies? And only 3 people have only said that they would, and they had a little goofy look in their eyes. But what I'm getting at is, then I say, well, would you take along some tragedies too? And they, well, sure. And I say, well, when you were all by yourself on that desert island watching that tragedy, would you be crying? And they say, well, sure, because the experience of tragedy. And I think this is the setup we're in now. It's like, the way I've put it together, Plato by this way, and following on with what you're saying. In his old age, his last book was The Laws. And in it, he said, we are God's toy. He began it by saying, if you think about it, there's not much to a human life. It's not very important. And we are God's toy. And he said, and the best way of dealing with this life is just sort of play at it. I see people all the time standing in line for a roller coaster, for example, with my daughter, who was not me. I was standing in line with her. People standing in line for 2 hours to get on a roller coaster, knowing full well that when they're upside down at 90 miles an hour, they won't want to be there. And I think life is kind of that way. I've been through some awful, terrible things. You mentioned I've just been a terrible illness lately. And just a month, I was feeling terrible. So the thing is that when we're in it, we might be kicking and screaming and protesting, even though in a larger sense, we might have set it up. It's like I've come to see, as a physician, is that every illness is an altered state of consciousness. Think about it. Every one of, even having a cold, your consciousness goes to the back of your throat. See it from there. Every illness has its own peculiar alterations in consciousness. So illnesses can be a learning experience too. So while we're in here, it's just like the movie too. I mean, I'm not much on horror movies. I'll go there with my daughter and my hands over my eyes. But it's you choose to go see a horror movie. For one thing, they told me, well, first of all, there is a family resemblance in that if you look at thousands of cases, you see about 15 or 20 common elements. But not everybody has the whole picture. And one person may have 1 or 2 or 3 of these things, or 7 or 8. Some people have the whole picture. And it does seem to correlate very nicely with how long the person was in a state of cardiac arrest. That the longer the cardiac arrest goes on, the more complex this experience becomes. But what people say is that at a certain point, they may hear the doctor or nurse or somebody else say, oh my God, he's dead, we've lost him, or words to that effect. But from their point of view, I hear people all the time say in one terms or another, I've never been so alive as when I heard that doctor say I was dead. Because people say it's kind of like waking up. They say you withdraw from your body, you leave your body, you can see the resuscitation team scene going on down below. You don't hear voices usually, but you can understand what the doctors and nurses are communicating or thinking, really is what they say. At a certain point, you realize, oh, I'm dying or something. They proceed through a passageway of some sort, like a hallway or a tunnel, or come out on the other side into this incredibly brilliant and warm and loving light. They say just taken up into comfort and peace. They say they see in spirit form relatives or friends of theirs who have already passed away, who seem to be there to meet them. And they undergo holographic panoramic memory, where they say that time stands still. They are in a timeless state. And in a sort of hologram displayed all around them, they see every action they've ever done. And they re-witness it not just from the perspective they had when they were doing the action, but they are also empathically embedded in the consciousness of the person with whom they're interacting. So if you do something mean to somebody, then you feel that person's pain and hurt. And everybody goes out of this saying that many people say that this is accompanied with a being of sheer light, to, let's say, complete compassion and love, who can see this and is sort of helping them think about it. And they say there are no words, but that it's the thought comes that what have you done with your life, or how have you learned to love? Because they say whatever you'd been chasing, like the creative buzz, like a friend of mine had their experiences, and me too, or the people who are looking for money or power or fame or knowledge is where, I'm chasing knowledge. But whatever anybody is chasing, they say that what comes clear in this panorama is that the important thing is to learn to love, because they say that's just. And then some people say, I have no idea how I got back. I was in this life, I was just back in my body. Other people say they were given a choice that you can either proceed with this or you can go back to the life you've been leading. And yet other people say you got to go back. There's things left to finish, but they're not told what it is. And then there are things beyond that. Some people say that they see into a realm, an entire realm of existence that seems to be predicated on the search for knowledge. And then beyond that, a realm of sheer light. The ones I sketched out there are the most common ones that people say. When they come back, they say, I'm just not afraid of death. Not that they would want pain in the process, but rather that they say that they learned from their experience that what we call death is a transition into another reality. You know, I had this friend of mine, I loved her dearly. I knew her for 20-something years till she died. Her doctor told me, he said she was dead, Ray, for 40 minutes. And I mean, the way she came back, it's too much to believe. But what people say is that they're like, here's George Ritchie's description was very graphic. He said that if you try to imagine Caltech and MIT and Harvard and Yale and Princeton and the Sorbonne and all of them squeezed into one place, he said, you can't even begin to imagine this. But he said there are people in there who are pursuing knowledge. And George said that there was one aspect of this realm that he said you could compare it to a library. And he said he noticed that in one section of that library was dedicated, he said, to the holy books of the universe. Well, I wish he could, but and I've heard these same things. It's another thing that people with these extremely in-depth, that you see that this thing we're in is kind of an illusion. It's like a projection, kind of, which I've kind of figured out by myself. They say it becomes very clear. And, it's like he thought we had an absolutely kind of duty insofar as we can think about it and see the illusionary quality. That certainly is how life feels in retrospect. When you're in the midst of it, it's immersive. I've gotten to the point where I would have these little insights that, oh yeah, this is an illusionary experience. And then the police knock on the front door, some terrible noise. So then you're immersed immediately in it again. But I've got to the point where I can keep the streams going. Like I can pretty much all the time kind of cognize or realize that it's theatrical or illusory thing. And at the same time, be irked by it and pleased by it and frightened by it and all the things. I think that a big part of it is to experience story, your life story, and the love and the relationship and the interconnections that come. And then I also think, although I'm not as sure of this one, but I do think that you can take the learning you make here, you can take that across with you, is what I understand from a lot of people. It's like a lot of people say that during these life reviews, that this being that they're with sort of focuses in on some specific things where they've been learning. And even though there's no words, they say the thought comes. That's very good. It's very interesting that even after you come here, that will go on for eternity, as a lot of people say. You get the impression that the process of knowledge is eternal. And I do think that we are in a situation of world history right now where the spiritual dimension of life will sort of be rationally comprehensible.